I'm Mark Hawthorne. I'm leader of Gloucestershire County Council. Welcome to Quayside, one of the new assets that we've just built here in the heart of the city. And if you're wondering what we use this room for, yesterday it was a council meeting, so I'm hoping it'll be slightly more less fractious than it was yesterday. Looking at Mr. Hilton, behave yourself. I've got my eye on you. But it is really good to welcome you all here today. I particularly want to thank all those who've done some pre-recorded videos, some of the people who will be speaking here today, and of course to our excellent conference chair, Baroness Renny. And thank you very much for giving up your time to come and do this for us today. Lots of people are going to be talking about what levelling up means to them, but what this conference means to me today is an opportunity to listen to communities from right across Gloucestershire about the issues that they face, the solutions they think need to be delivered, and what we collectively as a public sector family can do to work and help. I want this to be a very open and honest day. I want people to share that honest view. If there are things that we do that you don't like or don't work, tell us. This is your opportunity to share, because this is going to be the foundation of our levelling up conversation going forward. So it is great to see you all. I hope you get something out of this, but I hope you also recognise that this is the beginning of a journey, and a journey that we want to all participate in together. And I hope that when you leave here today, you get a sense of maybe things are starting to move forward. Thank you very much. And I think at this point, I am handing over to our very excellent chair, Baroness Renny. Baroness, over to you.
Thank you. Mark asked why no one's sitting in the front, and I had said to Will a little while ago that if you've ever spoken in America, it always fills up from the front first, because people want to be seen, they want to be able to have their question answered, but here we start from the back and think, oh God, am I going to have to sit in the front? So that's why nobody's sitting in the front. Please, everybody call me Renny, it's a bit much. When I was made a dame, many years ago, my sister bought me stripy stockings because she said, Widow Twankey is the best you can be. So, and as a person who started life in a council house in Scotland, you can imagine that being a dame and a baroness is still a bit of a surprise to me. Just a word or two from me to start off. I was asked to facilitate today. Now, why would I say yes? I live in Gloucester. It's my home. I went to school here. It's important to me. So this isn't just a nice thing to do on a Thursday afternoon. It's really, really important to me. I live here, I work here, and it matters to me. And I would want to remain connected to what happens afterwards in whatever way I can helpfully do to make sure that all that Mark has talked about, the listening leads to action, does happen. So I will be around. Many years ago, I was asked to facilitate an event for Outward Bound. And just before we all got together, the wardens and all the Outward Bound staff, they did some exciting abseiling off Bird Rock or something really exciting. And the warden who was introducing me got a bit mixed up, and he introduced me as their felicitator rather than facilitator. And I've always liked that. I've always thought it's about spreading happiness. So my hope is that today we'll be doing a bit of spreading happiness between us. Today, as Mark said, is all about listening, exploring, agreeing, and finding new ways to work together. I remember coming across a quality improvement mantra that says, do things well, do things better, then do better things. Then do those better things well, do them better, and do more better things. So today, we're developing ideas to do better things, and that's great. Another quote I really like is, when people who are not used to speaking are heard by people who are not used to listening, then real change can take place. Now, I know councillors are used to both listening and speaking, as well as advocating and making decisions. And I know that the voluntary sector, in the voluntary sector, we're used to speaking, to lobbying, to reporting. But the underlying sentiment remains. We're actually speaking in a different way today, and we're being listened to in a different way. And I think that's really important. Today's not about divisions and difference or party politics. It's about being together to make a difference together and to make sure we focus on levelling up and building back better. And importantly, we change how we do things, not just what we do, for those who most need and deserve it. So without further ado, welcome to everybody, and I'd like to hand over to Sarah Scott, who will tell us what she thinks levelling up really is. Sarah.
Thanks, Renee. Can you all hear me? Yeah. And the clicker works, that's great. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what I think levelling up is, how it's reflected it in the council strategy, a bit about inequality, and then how we think levelling up will help, and then we're having a quiz. So be prepared with your phones out, because we're going to use Slido. If you've not used it before, we're going to talk you through it. So the Levelling Up Bill's had its first reading in Parliament last week. It covers a huge range of different areas, and I think what the pandemic has done is shone a light on inequality. And as a Director of Public Health, I really welcome this spotlight. And it's the inequalities that persist in the UK, and that if we were to recover from COVID, we clearly need a different approach. So we've got Levelling Up as a cross-government strategy. So it has 4 main areas, which are up there on the screen. So really focusing on where areas are, it uses the word lagging behind and where they're weakest and where they've been lost, which is quite negative. But I think this is still a really good opportunity to try and bring about the same level of experience and living conditions and living standards across the UK. And it has 12 missions. I'm not going to show you all 12 missions, but 3 of them today were really relevant for our discussion. So really aiming to try and narrow that gap in healthy life expectancy. So healthy life expectancy is your number of years, as you would expect in healthy life, free of limiting disease. And it's surprisingly low, I think, in the county and across the country. It wants to improve well-being in every area of the UK and reduce the gap between those that are experiencing the best levels of well-being and those that are not. And the third mission I thought was really relevant was around pride in our place and people's satisfaction, not just with their town centre, but also engagement in local culture and community. And I think there's something there around how we listen to each other and then how we take that to make change for our communities. So in Gloucestershire, I'm from Public Health, so I'm always going to show you a graph and a map, so bear with me. So on one side, you've got the bar chart, and the blue lines are life expectancy, and you can see that in Gloucestershire, we're predominantly healthy and wealthy. So we're slightly better than the English average for life expectancy for men and women, and slightly better for healthy life expectancy. But what that belies is a real inequality, a difference in the local areas in Gloucestershire. So on the right-hand side, you'll see in men, we're looking at 68 years and 66 years for women. I still think that's quite young. On average, that is. And what we do see is that across the county, depending on where you live, if you were to live in one of the most deprived parts of the county, that might be 11 years less. So that's 55 if you're a woman. I'm 45 next month. That would end of this month. In fact, that feels quite young. So, and that's in 2022. So these are quite aspirational targets, I think, in the Levelling Up white paper, or bill even. But it's tackling things that are at the root cause of some of our inequalities in the county. So life expectancy is one way to illustrate inequality or disparity, whatever we want to call it now, and in health and other outcomes. And this slide talks about life expectancy, but also other measures. So another measure of inequality is educational attainment, and the example there is a score 8 at GCSE. I had to Google what a score 8 was. Apparently it's a good strong A, for those of you that are a bit more old school. But what we see is a real difference between the levels of educational attainment between our children living in our most and least deprived areas of the county. And the map on the other side, basically the more orange or red the wards, the higher the levels of deprivation. And you'll see they're clustered around Gloucester and Cheltenham and parts of the Forest. So what do we need to level up in Gloucestershire? We've called it, whether we call it levelling up, tackling inequalities or disparities, it is the same thing. They are avoidable and they are unfair and they are systematic differences between outcomes for our population. And we've been talking about this for a very, very, very long time. So we were then considering this in our council strategy. There we go. And one of our challenges was to reflect the Levelling Up white paper in the council strategy before the Levelling Up white paper was published. So that was tricky. And Mark's challenge to me was, Sarah, you've been talking about this for a long time. You talk about inequalities all the time. It's in your annual report. What will be different? We have had many programmes in many of our communities in Gloucester and Gloucestershire. So what will be different this time? How can we have a tangible impact that's sustainable? And so I obviously went away and thought about this. And I think for me, it's about the balance of power. And all the evidence suggests that actually, if you have a top-down approach, and public health is very guilty of this, it's very medical model, or has been very medical model, and to a certain degree, I think we've seen that across the statutory sector, then if we're not listening, if we're thinking we've always got the answer, then we're clearly missing a trick. And quite a lot of the previous programmes have been nationally or regionally driven. And we saw, especially during the pandemic, the power of communities and the strengths of the voluntary community and social enterprise sector. And they came up with a huge range of innovative solutions really, really quickly, and all they needed was a bit of cash, and they supported our most vulnerable consistently throughout the pandemic. Now, I don't think that model is necessarily sustainable. A lot of people have gone back to work, but I think it does teach us some powerful lessons around the value of that sector and what it can add to our most vulnerable. So my response to Mark was we need to change our approach. I think we need to have a focus on strengths and not deficits. And you might reflect that all the data I presented today is very deficit focused. I can't imagine what it's like to live in a community that when we label you as deprived, when actually you might find you're a really vibrant, engaging, fun community to live in, but actually the data says that you're deprived. So it must be really stigmatising. So how do we change this and listen to communities themselves? Well, I think part of that is today. So in our strategy, we've committed, there's a lot of words on that slide, I'll let them read them in your own time, but essentially we want to listen to communities about what they want to achieve and how. We want to work alongside neighbourhoods, and we've got some really great examples of the power of three in Maxon, Robbinswood and White City. Mark's here today. And how can we take that learning and take what we've learned during the pandemic and really try and change things for our communities and recognise that a lot of the solutions are there, but actually what is needed is some flexibility and perhaps a different approach from the statutory sector.